So good evening and welcome everyone, old and new. Nice to have some new faces. And apologies for those of you who are new, I didn't introduce the prostration practice, just kind of force of habit, went straight into it. But I will just say a word about that. Is everybody kind of totally familiar with that, or would it be useful to explain it a little bit? Explain it a little bit, yeah. Okay. So the purpose of prostration, it has two sort of, if you like, functions, two main functions. So it has others actually as well. But the emphasis with prostration is on two things. One is reducing pride, obviously. So we prostrate generally to Buddhas, fully enlightened beings. So by definition, a Buddha is someone who has actualized all the positive qualities of mind. It is a case of recognizing those qualities. And in particular, it's the quality of compassion. So an enlightened being, a Buddha, by definition, has unlimited compassion for all living beings. And that is the particular quality that it is said, that is the reason why it is suitable to prostrate to Buddhas. So the physical action, there are physical, verbal and mental prostration. Body, speech and mind are involved. So the physical action is like, symbolizes touching your head to the feet of the Buddha, the highest point of your body to the lowest point of their body. Recognizing their, not necessarily superiority, but recognizing their superior qualities, if you like, recognizing that they do have those profoundly beneficial qualities that it's suitable to pay respect. So the mental prostration is the actual respect, the attitude of respect, and that is the most important one. So you can't do the physical action or even the verbal action. The verbal action is the mantra. So we say the mantra Om Namo Manjushriye. Namo meaning I pay homage or I prostrate. And the Tibetan word is Chagzalo, the translation of Namo, which is the Sanskrit, similar to Namaste, when you do this in India, saying, I honor or I prostrate to you. Chagzalo is said to mean, may I become like you. So in showing respect, in deference to that high spiritual quality of compassion, you are making the prayer, if you like, may I have that same unlimited compassion towards all, and all of the other qualities of wisdom and so on that the Buddha has. Okay. In a nutshell. So obviously it is cultivation of that spiritual quality of humility, recognizing the good qualities of others and de-emphasizing your own sense of your own worth or your own superiority. And that's something we'll be talking about quite a lot, because this quality of humility is very important in this mind training aspect of the teachings, which we'll be looking at in this course. I need to say right at the beginning, originally I'd envisaged doing this over one term, just as with the previous course, and then after reflection decided that it would be much better to do it over two terms. So I hope that's not going to be a problem for anybody. You kind of have to miss a thing. I'll try to do it so that there's some kind of integrity to the first term, but we will continue going to a little bit more depth. And also what I'd like to do in this text called Advice from a Spiritual Friend, which I see is the title that we've given to the course, there are several texts in there, and in particular I'll say a bit more about it in a moment, but the first of the sort of classical text, which is recognized, if you like, as the root text for this Lojong, a mind training aspect of the Buddhist teachings, is the 8 verses of thought transformation or mind training. So that's printed in the book, and the main text that we're going to be looking at, the 7-point thought transformation, is inspired by it, derives from it. So I'm going to start with that after this evening. I think this evening will just be an introductory sort of session. We'll look at the tradition of mind training as a whole and its place in Buddhist practice and in the Buddhist tradition. And then maybe, I don't know, 2 weeks or even 3 weeks on the 8 verses, and then we'll look at the 7-point thought transformation, which is a more detailed, more systematic explanation of the mind training. Okay, so that's just by way of introduction what we're going to be doing. And in this class we've been doing sort of prayers at the beginning. I think as it's the first one, we'll start on page 5 with the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha. That's very traditional to do at the beginning. And then we'll do the Heart Sutra, and we'll do that each week. So page 5, praise to Shakyamuni Buddha in English. Right. Just take a moment before we start to settle the mind. So take a few moments to go inward and check your bodily posture, make sure it's comfortable and stable. And take a few breaths to settle and relax the body and mind. And so the origin of all these teachings, of course, is Shakyamuni Buddha, the historical Buddha. Who became enlightened at Bodh Gaya in India 2,500 years ago. So call to mind the image of Shakyamuni Buddha. Visualize him seated in front of you at the place where the Buddha statue is, not as a statue, but as a real living human being. Someone who, through diligent effort, has succeeded in realizing the most profound truth of the nature of reality, overcoming all self-centered tendencies, completely dedicated to freeing all sentient beings from suffering, and possessing all of the wisdom, the understanding, the skillful means to be able to do that. So if you have a personal spiritual teacher or guru in this life, then think Shakyamuni Buddha and your own spiritual teacher, your guru, are not separate. No difference whatsoever. Same mind, different physical form. and try to generate the strong conviction that your Guru, Shakyamuni Buddha, if you don't have a personal teacher in this life, a living one, you should think Shakyamuni Buddha is your root Guru, and think he is definitely here in this room with us. Not in a gross form of flesh and blood, but in a subtle form, but nevertheless absolutely present. And we recite the verses of praise. To the Founder, the Endowed, Transcendent Destroyer, the One Gone Beyond, the Foe Destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings and go for refuge. To the Founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings and go for refuge. To the Founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings and go for refuge. When, O Supreme amongst humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides, then said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise then, I prostrate. With pure bodies, form supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like a spotless moon, colour like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not, incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Saviour having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all 3 ever devout homage. To all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms' atoms in all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only virtuous actions, subdue your mind thoroughly, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness and death. So just refresh your sense of the presence of Shakyamuni Buddha. Imagine that we are present at the scene of this teaching given 1 year after the Buddha's enlightenment at Vulture's Peak in Rajagir, where the Buddha turned the wheel of the Mahayana Dharma revealed the Mahayana teachings for the first time. We'll recite the sutra together. Thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagavan was dwelling on Masavulcha's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Sharadvatiputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form, form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odour, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly, completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared: Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhisoha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that. It is like that one should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated, even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvatiputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, those surrounding in their entirety along with the world of gods, humans, asuras and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. So turn to page 21. And so before listening to teaching or any kind of Dharma practice, it's traditional to recite this verse, taking refuge in the three jewels and generating the mind of bodhicitta. So taking refuge on many levels. You may feel at this point It's not something that you're doing, that you're coming out of interest to listen to the teachings. That's fine, you can just listen. Or you may already have formally taken refuge in Buddhism, and then you are reaffirming and renewing that refuge. Or you may not be at that point, but just feeling that you're beginning your Buddhist journey, then you take this verse as just as a reminder of whatever level of commitment and motivation you have in terms of Buddhist practice. And in terms of bodhicitta, this is the Mahayana motivation not merely to engage in spiritual practice for one's own benefit, but in order to be able to benefit others in the most extensive and most deepest possible way. So again, at whatever level you feel able to relate to this idea, then you can recite with that in mind. So again, just refresh the sense that your Guru, Shakyamuni Buddha, is absolutely present in the room with us, and we are undertaking this commitment at whatever level we do so in his presence. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. So visualize that Guru Shakyamuni Buddha now comes towards you, becomes smaller, turns round and comes to rest on the crown of your head. About the size of your thumb. Again, vividly imagine that he is actually present, actually there, and you're able to receive the blessings from your Guru, from Shakyamuni Buddha. The embodiment of pure, perfect compassion, perfect wisdom. Guru Shakyamuni Buddha dissolves into golden light, which flows down into your body, filling your body, blessing your body, speech and mind. Your body becomes very blissful and pure. Your mind merges with the holy mind of Guru Shakyamuni Buddha. Serenely blissful, peaceful, absorbed in emptiness, the ultimate nature of phenomena. Allow your mind to rest in that peace and purity. gently relax your concentration and slowly end the meditation. We had hoped to have copies of this book today. They have apparently arrived at the post office on Wellington Road, but they haven't got here. So I have some copies here of printouts of the first chapter. Does anybody like printed? Okay. I haven't been able to kind of bind them up in any way, so just. Yeah, there you go. There's one, double-sided one. This one we just printed out just before I got started, so it's not perfect. Yeah, so they're not quite complete, I'm afraid, but most of it's there. There is a PDF download available, and if any people want to leave their email addresses, I can email it out to everyone.
PDF of the whole book?
Yes, I think so, yeah. There's 3 slightly different versions of this. It was originally published in 1977. There was a revised edition published in 1983, and then a significantly more revised one published in 2000. I think it's the 1983 version is that printout, and that's the PDF. So I'll send that to anyone who'd like one. And next week we should have the books.
Yeah, I've got a few on order, so I've got 3 spare, so 3 or 4 spare. So if anybody wants a copy and not let me know, then email me.
Yeah. Okay. So this book was one of the first published books in this kind of new wave of Tibetan Buddhism, if you like. And there were, before this, there were a few things like Evans Ventz's translation of the Tibetan Book of the Dead and things, but nobody really, except the very few scholars, had much of an idea of what the living tradition of Tibetan Buddhism was really like. And it was these pioneers, Brian Beresford, who translated and edited this book, Stephen Batchelor, Alan Wallace and others who were there in the 1970s, who actually, they went out on the hippie trail and they studied at the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives Translation Bureau and translated these texts. So this was one of the very first ones that came out, and I think it's a very special book. This aspect of the Buddhist teachings, known as Lojong in Tibetan, translated as mind training or thought transformation, is, I think, is very, very important, because there's an amazing array of different Buddhist teachings in the Tibetan tradition, all sorts of very wonderful teachings, but there's a kind of magic ingredient that is needed to make them truly meaningful, and without that ingredient, especially some of the more advanced teachings can actually be much less beneficial, not beneficial at all. So this particular tradition of Lojong, I think it focuses on the most essential element in the teaching, which is the altruism. That the altruistic motivation, the motivation, especially within the Tibetan tradition, I think even more than any other Buddhist tradition, although there are other, the Mahayana is much wider than just Tibetan Buddhism, it's also Chinese Buddhism, Korean, Japanese Buddhism, and so on. But in the Tibetan tradition, I think the emphasis is stronger than anywhere else on this element of altruism. We are not doing this for ourselves. It will benefit us. More than anything else will benefit, but the essence of why it benefits us so profoundly is that our motivation isn't focused on, it's not focused on me, it's focused on everyone else. And that aspect which is the essence of what bodhicitta is, which is the essence of what Mahayana Buddhism is, that is highlighted more in this Lojong tradition than anything else. It's a very, very pure spiritual tradition in that way. And so that's why I thought it would be really, really good to look at this in some depth. This was very much my first introduction to Tibetan Buddhism, which was when I actually became a Buddhist. I had, come across Buddhism before and been to a couple of talks and things, but hadn't really kind of taken it on board. But when I actually took up Buddhism in 1980, it was very much this aspect that I was first introduced to by my teacher, John Marshall, who was one of the same cohort of people at the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives. So I received teaching on this 7-point mind training from him. And I mention that because it's very much sort of emphasized in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition that it's important, this oral tradition lineage, like, John, I'm sure, was actually present at these teachings that were given that are transcribed in this book. So it's kind of come from him to me, to you. So I'm not claiming to be any sort of example, but this fact that it's been come down through that lineage is regarded as important in itself. I've just mentioned that. Geshe Rabten and Geshe Dagye, who gave the teachings, are absolutely sort of superb examples of the, or role models, if you like, for the spiritual qualities that are emphasized here, which are seen as the most precious, the most important. So even though the teaching itself is quite simple, quite practical, like down to earth, it's not like this advanced, complex tantric teachings. When it's not saying that those are in any way anything other than the most precious and most wonderful, but only if they have this underlying sort of quality of altruistic motivation, which is these teachings are about. So these teachings are the essential foundation, really, for the higher teachings. And they are the ones almost more prized than anything else by the great lamas, the great geshes. So that's one thing. But as I say, they are very practical, very down to earth, and particularly suitable, I think, for Western practitioners, because it's very much emphasized that this is not just something to do on your meditation cushion. This is all about how to apply the essence of the Buddhist teachings in your practical daily life in a way that is of the most benefit and the most immediately applicable. So it's quite difficult for us, to apply the sort of generation stage teachings of Tantra in our daily lives. But this is very, very down to earth, very real and very practical. So just a little bit about why I've chosen to sort of follow on, because in the last two terms, as most of you probably know, that we were looking at the Lam Rim, this Essence of Refined Gold, this wonderful text by the third Dalai Lama. And both of these aspects of Dharma, of Buddhist teaching, the Lojong, the thought transformation, the Lam Rim, the graduated path to enlightenment, both of these derive from the same teacher, Lama Atisha, who was this very important source for the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, who came to Tibet in the 11th century. The Lam Rim is like, as I probably said at the beginning of that course, it's a wonderful sort of map. It's kind of sort of concise summary of all the different aspects of Buddhist practice, arranged in a way for practice rather than just for academic study. So it's really useful to kind of know the Lamrim. It kind of shows you the map of where everything fits into a whole complete system. It's a very important and very wonderful sort of system of Buddhist practice taught by Lama Atisha in this text, Light on the Path to Enlightenment. And Lama Tsongkhapa's major work, the Lamrim Chenmo, the great exposition of the graduated path to enlightenment, is based on Atisha's teachings. And in fact, he states that Atisha is the real author of his text. So that gives you an idea of how important Atisha is seen within the Gelug tradition coming from Tsongkhapa, that he is the root of that tradition. And in fact, it may interest you to know, in this centre we follow the New Kadampa tradition, because that was the name that was given to the Gelug tradition, because they followed the Kadampa tradition was the one founded by Lama Atisha. And it was so much formed the basis of the Gelug tradition that Lama Tsongkhapa founded, that his tradition was known as the New Kadampa tradition. And that's where it comes from. So we also NKT here, but not quite in the same way. So Lama Atisha founded this Kadampa tradition. It became absorbed into the Gelug, but disappeared because all the Kadampa lamas became, they kind of, because Tsongkhapa followed the Kadampa tradition so sort of, he incorporated lots of other things, but it was the foundation of the Gelug tradition. So Kadampa ceased to exist as a separate tradition because it kind of got absorbed into the Gelugpa. But these teachers, following from Atisha, the Kadampa Geshes as they were known, and this is not Geshe in the same meaning as now, where it means someone who has undergone a certain course of study and passed a sort of examination of debate and so on. So it's really almost, in a way, like an academic qualification. But here it doesn't mean that. The word Geshe means a spiritual friend. That's the translation. And these Kadampa Geshes, they were spiritual friend Geshes in the sense that I was thinking how to actually explain it. It's very, sort of has a very clear meaning to me, this word Geshe here in this context. Is someone who, out of their profound selfless kindness, strives to help others on the spiritual path. That's how I see the meaning of spiritual friend here, translating the word Geshe. And that's what these Kadampa Geshes were like. They were famous for their very pure moral discipline and their selfless altruistic motivation. Okay. So these were the followers of Lama Atisha, and the first one, Geshe Drum Tonpa, who was Atisha's personal attendant. He very, very dedicated to his guru, and Atisha passed on all of his lineages to him, and then they went on down through the sequence of Geshe Potawa, Geshe Langwe Tangpa, and Geshe Sharawa, and Geshe Chekawa, who was the author of the main text in here, the 7-point thought transformation. And they all had these qualities of selflessness and pure moral discipline, particularly, and humility. These were the characteristics of the Kadampa Geshes. And also, John Marshall was like that. My teacher, he was always talking about the Kadampa Geshes. He was a completely dedicated Kadampa practitioner. So if I have any of that quality, which I very much doubt, it comes from him. It comes down through this lineage. I know it's very opposite to my sort of personality, but I'm struggling, trying to to follow this, because I can see how profoundly valuable this approach to spiritual practice emphasizing humility, emphasizing moral discipline, emphasizing compassion and concern for others, selfless, dedication to the welfare of others. That's the essence of this Kadampa tradition. Okay. So it comes from Lama Atisha, and he was one of the really famous spiritual Buddhist teachers at this crucial time in the 11th century. Buddhism in Tibet was going through a kind of a crisis. It had been introduced in the 7th, 8th century by the king of Tibet had actually married two wives, a Chinese wife and a Nepalese wife, and they represented two different Buddhist traditions. So that's when Buddhism came through the two queens of the king Trison Detsen in the 8th century, and he invited two great teachers, Shantarakshita and Kamalashila, to Tibet to come and teach, and they were unable to establish Buddhism in Tibet because there were so many kind of obstacles and negative spiritual forces there, and he had to bring in Padmasambhava, this very powerful tantric yogi who subdued these spirits and other beings. So there is a kind of interesting dramatic sort of history there. And then sometime later there was a very sort of militant anti-Buddhist king who destroyed a lot of the monasteries and killed a lot of the monks and things, and so there's a kind of dark period. And at this time in the 11th century, there was a great revival. There was travelling to India was really quite an undertaking from Tibet at that time, but it began to happen more, and quite a number of practitioners went to India and invited Indian teachers came. So Atisha was one of those, and he was one of the most famous, most highly regarded teachers in India. He was at the Vikramashila, which was one of the two great Buddhist monasteries. He was the main teacher there, and so of course the monks there were they didn't think he should go to this, back of beyond Tibet. This place, why you want to go there for, And Atisha was very reluctant to go, and was invited on 2 or 3 occasions, I think, and declined to go. Until eventually, the story is that, this is what happened. This is what happened. I say, it's not a story. This is what happened. There were several Tibetan kings at the time, and there was this king Yeshe-U, who had invited Atisha to come, because he'd heard about his reputation and thought it would be wonderful if he could come and bring Buddhism, the pure Buddhist teachings, to Tibet. And he had declined. And there was a bit of a war going on, and Yeshe-U was captured by a rival king who demanded the weight of his head in gold as a ransom. And his brother, was known as Jangtrup-U, managed to get all of this gold together. Maybe it was his body, actually. Maybe it was the weight of his body in gold, I think. Managed to get all of this gold together and was going to bring it to the other king to free Yeshe-U, who otherwise was going to be killed. And Yeshe-U said, "Don't bring the gold, take it to Atisha and offer it to him to come to Tibet to bring the Dharma." So he was killed. So he sacrificed his life in order for Atisha to come to Tibet and bring all of the Mahayana teachings. So this was how highly Atisha was regarded by the Tibetans at the time, and it was how highly they valued the Dharma, that this king gave his life for Atisha to come to Tibet. And Atisha himself I don't quite remember how it happened, but there was a prophecy given that if he went to Tibet, it would bring great benefit, but it would shorten his life by many years. But he came. So that's the story. And he was known as the Refuge Lama. That was a kind of nickname that the Tibetans gave him, because there were a lot of lamas coming giving all these high tantric teachings, and Lama Atisha was all the time on refuge. The very basic, most basic teaching, because he recognized that this foundation, the basic teaching, was so important for people to have a really strong grounding in these basic teachings before taking on these high complex tantric teachings and other profound teachings. So although he taught all the sort of tantra and the profound wisdom teachings, but the emphasis was always on the basics, on refuge, on exchanging self for others, on the preliminary practices, death awareness and so on, these very, very foundational teachings. He brought that emphasis, and I think that's one of the reasons why Tibetan Buddhism has been so strong, so resilient, that it has survived all of the things that have happened, especially recently, to it. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama really reveres Atisha as this really truly great teacher, because not only did he bring these very advanced, profound teachings, but laid that real solid foundation on which everything else depends. So particularly in the Lamrim and the Lojong teachings. So as I say, this was then passed down to Drom Tunpa, Atisha's immediate successor, Geshe Potawa, and Geshe Langri Tangpa was Geshe Potawa's disciple, and he was the first one to actually write down some of this oral tradition. It was passed down. First of all, these thought transformation teachings were passed on as a secret lineage. They weren't given publicly. They were just given to selected disciples. And Langri Tangpa wrote this text, the 8 verses of thought transformation, very famous. And again, it's a particular favourite of the Dalai Lama. He says, whenever I have some free time, I recite these verses. So they became quite widely known, but possibly not all that well understood. And there was this Lama Geshe Chekawa who came across this text and was very intrigued by it. Who particularly, it's not quite clear actually. I think it's the 5th verse that he was struck by, where it says, when others out of jealousy treat me badly with abuse, insults and the like, I shall accept their harsh words and offer the other the victory. And he was intrigued by this unusual, strange idea. I wanted to understand more about it. So he went to try to find Geshe Langri Tangpa to ask him about it. But Geshe Langri Tangpa had died. So he asked about who could tell him. And there's another Geshe Sharawa, who was Geshe Langri Tangpa's disciple. And Geshe Chekawa went to find him. And he was giving a teaching, so he listened to the teaching, but there was nothing about this in there. And so he after the teaching, he went and sort of sat in wait for Geshe Sharawa and stopped him as he was going on his circumambulation around the monastery. And he said, what do you want? I've explained everything in the teaching, why you've come, bothering me, sort of thing, according to the story in the book. And Geshe Chekawa asked him about this verse. And he said, well, I didn't explain that because no one is interested. So he'd just been talking about the Hinayana path. There was so rare to find anyone who really wanted to follow the Mahayana path, the self-sacrificing way, if you like, of putting others first. And he found it was so rare for anybody to be interested, he wasn't bothering to teach it. So But he did teach it to Geshe Chekawa, who spent 12 years studying with him, and then wrote this text of the 7-point thought transformation, which was the first one that really kind of explained in detail these secret teachings that had come down from Lama Atisha. So that's what we're going to study. But I thought it would be good if we start with the 8 verses, since we have a little bit more time. So I'll talk a little bit about them. So that's kind of a brief sort of historical introduction, if you like. And I'll just pause there for any questions. Is there anything that's not clear, or any questions arising? Or is that all okay? You're all happy? Okay. So then I'll talk a little bit about the 8 verses, and we'll see how far we get. So again, in accordance with tradition, I should say where or from whom I received the transmission of this. And I can't actually remember if John taught this text specifically, John Marshall. He probably did. But certainly I attended teachings by His Holiness the Dalai Lama in, I think, 1987. He taught this text. And it's available as in book form, called Transforming the Mind. Very wonderful teachings that His Holiness gave on the 8 verses of thought transformation. So I'm not giving commentary on His Holiness's teachings. I'm really just going to talk in a very informal way, based on my own understanding, but it's to some extent authenticated in that I did attend that teaching. So hopefully I'm not going to be leading you astray, but I do recite the text myself on a frequent basis. I find it, like as His Holiness says, very inspiring to do. And I'll just say a word about this, the name of these teachings, Lojong, before we go any further, because I think that's quite illuminating to look at this word and what it means. So Lo means mind or thought or consciousness, okay? And Jong means to turn, to change, or to turn around. So it's thought transformation or mind training, or changing the mind, turning the mind around. And the essence of the idea is that normally our mind is kind of centered on me, I. So there's this term self-cherishing, which I think it's not a totally satisfactory translation, because it kind of suggests we're trying to get rid of self-cherishing, which suggests that we shouldn't cherish ourselves, and I don't think that's quite right. It doesn't quite mean that. It's sometimes translated as self-centeredness, and I think that's maybe better, because we know that has a certain ring to it that I think is in alignment with how the term is meant. So there are two mental factors that are linked. And these two mental factors are the targets of the Lojong practice. And the idea is that we turn it around, we turn them around, we reverse, we invert those mental attitudes, that mental orientation. Self-cherishing is one, or self-centeredness if you like, and self-grasping is the other. So these are not the same, but they are closely connected to each other. And everything in these Lojong teachings is about, the opponent, or the way to eliminate or to transform, to dispel those two mental factors, right? And what it's saying is that this is the whole of Dharma practice. Everything in this Mahayana, the way that it's understood in this Mahayana tradition, we can say that these two mental factors are the whole of the problem. And overcoming these two mental factors is the whole of the spiritual path. Everything that we do in the spiritual path is about eliminating, overcoming self-grasping and self-cherishing or self-centeredness, these two. So they're slightly different. In most of the Lojong texts and teachings, the majority of the what's talked about is focused on the self-cherishing, the self-centeredness. Because that's, if you like, that is what the method aspect is to do with eliminating self-cherishing or self-centeredness and developing its opposite, other-centeredness, if you like, yeah, concern for others. That's the method aspect. And the wisdom aspect is to do with the opponent, the opposite force to the self-grasping. So self-grasping is it's a concept, okay? Whereas the self-cherishing is like a motivation. It's like an emotional state. The self-grasping is a conceptual mind, a thought that apprehends the self in a certain way that is mistaken. So it's a form of ignorance. Yeah. So the wisdom aspect is overcoming the ignorance, the mistaken view of the self. The method aspect, the self-grasping, and the method aspect is overcoming the faulty motivation, the self-centeredness, the selfish mind, if you like, self-centered mind. Okay. And in most of the Lojong teachings, the method aspect is more emphasized. But as with all of every aspect of authentic aspect of Tibetan Buddhism, there should be, a balance between the two. It's always got to be a union of method and wisdom. So it's not that the wisdom side is less important, not at all. But the emphasis tends to be more on the method aspect. Okay. So the development of compassion, loving kindness, they're the opposite mind to the self-cherishing, the self-centered mind. So by distilling the whole thing down to just these two things, you see, it makes it very, very concise and very simple in a way. It's like, this is what we need to understand. This is our focus. There are various different kind of branches and so on, but in the Lojong it's particularly sort of concentrated, down to just these two principles. This is what Dharma is all about, and I think that's one reason why it's a very clear sort of, it helps to clarify what our practice itself needs to be. Brings it back to the fundamentals. So the first verse reads in this translation, which I think is slightly different in these different editions, the one that I know. Being determined to accomplish the highest welfare for all beings who excel the wish-fulfilling gem, I shall constantly hold them dear. So this, obviously, this is the bodhicitta motivation, yeah? Being determined to accomplish the highest welfare for all beings. So it's very much Mahayana. Right at the beginning, it's made very clear this is a Mahayana practice. I am not engaging in this practice essentially for my own sake, but in order to benefit all beings, all living beings throughout the universe in the highest possible way. Determined to accomplish the highest welfare for all beings. So I think this is something that is worthwhile to think deeply about. It's very easy to talk about, leading all sentient beings to enlightenment. And then it trips off the tongue nicely. What does it mean? Can we get our minds around that idea? I mean, there are infinitely many sentient beings. Even in this world, this tiny little planet, even just looking at human beings, there are 7 billion human beings on this planet. So when I talk about, I'm going to lead all of them to enlightenment, can I relate realistically to that idea, or is that just words? And even that's, hardly even beginning, isn't it? It's much, much vaster than that. So I think it's quite an important question, is it just some sort of spiritual hyperbole? Do they really mean it? Are we really talking about this? Or is it just something to impress our minds and make us think? Do you know what I mean? Or is it real? So last month, I was in Bodh Gaya, along with Adam and a few other people, 200,000 other people, 200,000 of us in a tent, listening to the Dalai Lama. And I've been attended teachings by the Dalai Lama on a number of occasions over the last 35 years. So it's kind of like nothing new. But it was because it helped me to get a little bit closer to what this might mean. When I saw how he is thinking and what he's doing. So for example, every morning the Heart Sutra was chanted. Every morning in a different language. So we had it in Sanskrit, Pali, Chinese, Korean, Tibetan, English. Mongolian, for sure, yeah. I think about 20 different languages it was chanted in. Now why is that? Was that just sort of for entertainment? No, he's bringing together, he's unifying the whole Buddhist world in that place. And he spoke about, the relationship of Tibetan Buddhism to Mongolian Buddhism, and to Thai Buddhism, and to Chinese Buddhism, and to Indian Buddhism. Bringing together, kind of reaching out, this influence of this selflessness that he is such an example of, and there's so many, there are many great lamas on the stage there around him, the Karmapa, the Sakya-trees and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, all of them prostrating to him. And all of them going out, with the blessings from the Kalachakra initiation, going out into the world and bringing those blessings to their thousands of disciples around the world. And on and on. You begin to see the vastness. This is beyond anything I can conceive of me doing. I can't imagine that. I can't imagine that. But I do trust and have faith that if I follow this path, eventually, not in this life, maybe not in the next life, maybe the one after that or the one after that, that's where I'm going. So we were there in Bodh Gaya, of course, where the Buddha actually, 2,500 years ago, this guy who gone off into the forest, he's sitting under a tree meditating. You think, where's that going? Certainly that's what his father thought. He'd lost it. He'd gone off. He was destined to become a great king, and all he'd done is cut off his hair, gone into the forest, and gone off with these naked ascetics, starving himself and meditating. Crazy. And yet, 2,500 years later, hundreds of millions of people around the world following his teachings. So, clearly, what I can see is it is vast. The potential is, it's beyond what I can really grasp at the moment, but I can see that it's there. So I'm just trying to convey some sense of how that phrase, bringing all sentient beings to enlightenment, might really, have some reality to it. Because otherwise it just, this kind of nice poetical, rhetorical sounding phrase, it doesn't mean anything. And I see, that holiness to me is the ultimate example that I can see. Not just, I've talked about this sort of wonderful work that he's doing in unifying all the different Buddhist traditions and speaking about, the different aspects and how the different teachings relate to each other, so that instead of people disagreeing, well, I'm from this Buddhist tradition, I don't agree with that, he's saying, well, yes, but this fits in here and this works like this. So we can all there can be a harmonious world Buddhist community. I think it's amazing work that he's doing. But that's just one aspect, isn't it? He's working with scientists and psychologists from the West, trying to bring Buddhism together with Western science and Western philosophy. He's working with people who are trying to bring about peace in the world, working with people who are working on the environmental issues. So, I don't want to just turn into a sort of fan club for the Dalai Lama, but I just did begin to get a little more of a taste of what that might mean, the power of this enlightened mind, which comes fundamentally from this selfless motivation. That's really the essence of it. The primary cause of enlightenment is compassion. Concern for the welfare of others, concern for the suffering of others. So, everything that I've just been saying, in a way, is kind of just an embellishment. To try to give some sense to the imagination of what it might mean. The essence of it is that in this verse, it's saying the seed, the root cause of enlightenment, of all the beneficial qualities that come from this Mahayana spiritual path, is this selfless concern for others, wanting to bring others to the highest welfare, wanting another being to have the highest happiness, to have everything desirable. And without discrimination. So it's not just, obviously the mother has that for the child. Oh, of course I want the best for my child. But that's kind of based on a special connection to one being, But this is just because someone is another person or another being, just because they have a mind that can experience joy and sorrow, pain and pleasure. Just because of that, just because they have that, which is what I have, which is what I am, the essence of what I am is that I am a conscious being who therefore can experience happiness and unhappiness, suffering and joy, isn't it? And so because you are that, there's really the same reason for me to want you to be happy and free from suffering. So in this verse, not only wanting other beings to be happy, but being determined to accomplish the highest welfare for all beings. Not only that I want you to be happy, but I am going to bring that about. Now, we have to be careful with this, because sometimes trying to help others can be a terrible mistake, can't it? Some of you may have experience of this. This person's having such a hard time. I'm going to help them. And you try and help them, and oh dear, it turns out not for the best. So it's not that we rush into, saving and rescuing everybody, because that can be very unskillful. It can be a serious mistake. But with wisdom, recognizing that it may take a long time, may take a lot of work, but it's totally worthwhile to make that commitment now. There'll never be reason to regret making the commitment to dedicate my life, not just for this life, but the next life and the life after that and the life after that, to dedicate my life to becoming able to help others genuinely on a deep level. But this takes wisdom. This takes a lot of work. Yes.
It says a lot. It's saying a lot about others.
Mm.
I've been thinking as we've been talking.
Yeah.
It's important, if we're not going to discriminate and we're going to have wisdom in mind to help others,
Yes.
that we include ourselves in
Of
it.
course.
Because there's something very conflicting, isn't there, about someone who wants to help others but doesn't have
Certainly.
regard for themselves.
Yes. Yes.
And then the second
Absolutely.
of the verses takes us into I will see myself as at the lowest, which is a practice, isn't it?
Yes.
But I think overall, if you don't acknowledge that I am all beings, I'm part
Sure. Yeah, that's true. Yes, indeed.
of it, it's a problem.
Yeah. 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 So one of the things that, there, it said that the Mahayana path is a way to actualize the purpose of oneself and of others. So both of those are important. So if I don't, if I don't do it for myself, I can't do it for others, for a start. If I don't overcome my own suffering, how can I lead others from suffering? I can't. I don't have the ability to do that. It's impossible.
You can't jump in and say someone
No.
you can't swim.
This is what I'm saying, that it's unskillful to go out and try and save others before we have acquired the ability to do so. And in acquiring that ability, developing the qualities that we need to have in order to truly help others, we automatically fulfill our own welfare. Yeah, so that's very fundamentally important. And one way to sort of conceptualize that is the relationship between renunciation and bodhicitta, or compassion. So we looked at the three principal aspects of the path last time. So this renunciation is what you are renouncing, what you are giving up is inauthentic ways to try to fulfill your own purpose, ways that actually don't work, ways based on craving and grasping, based on, in fact, on self-cherishing, self-centeredness. We were talking about this the other night in Hull, talking about samsara and nirvana. What's the difference between? And I had some quite good comments from some of the audience there about, the motivations that people follow. Wanting to sort of gain sort of career advancement and sort of become a celebrity and all of these things, that motivate people very strongly, and people make massive sacrifices for these objectives that in fact bring no real benefit. And sometimes they can wreck their lives by pursuing an objective, thinking that this is going to bring happiness, and in fact it's a mistake. So these mistaken sort of motivations, these ways of basing our life, trying to give meaning to our life, or trying to gain satisfaction or happiness through inauthentic ways, are what we need to renounce, what we need to give up. We need to follow those things, those aims that actually do bring us true benefit. So that's a renunciation. And if we want to benefit others, we obviously have to do that first for ourselves, don't we? I mean, it seems self-evident. If I haven't sorted out for myself what's of real benefit and what isn't, how can I possibly lead somebody else to real happiness? So, without renunciation, real compassion, authentic compassion is impossible. We can have the sort of that compassionate feeling, but we can't, unless we can discriminate what is truly of benefit and what isn't, we can't help others. And so here, and I've talked about to try to sort of paint a picture of what it might mean, all sentient beings. But in a way, it's very, very simple. The way that I think we can think about it is, whoever crosses your path. You don't have to think about trillions of hell beings and hungry ghosts and insects and animals and all of these. It's just like whoever crosses your path, you have the same concern. Whether they're, your mother or somebody, a stranger, or somebody who irritates you, or an insect, or whatever. So if it's a sentient being, if it's a being that is capable of experiencing suffering and happiness, if we can train our minds to have the same wish, whoever or whatever, whichever being we encounter, to have the same wish for them to be happy as we have for ourselves, that's it. And it's very simple, isn't it? But it's very difficult. Thank you. because our minds are very very much creatures of habit, and we have very deeply ingrained habits. So this self-cherishing comes naturally to us, the self-centeredness, I want that, I need that. That's very good, isn't it? Yes, but I need that. Sorry, they can't have it because I need it. Very strong, these minds. So, in a way, the essence of the mind training is very simple, that it's just that. As Geshe Rabten says at the beginning, initially our mind's a bit stiff and inflexible. We have these ingrained habits of self-cherishing. And at first it seems like, well, that's just how it is. I think a lot of people think that. And I was saying that in a hole last night. People tend to think that if I react with anger to a certain situation, well, that situation, because that situation is the way it is, I can't help that. I have no choice. The anger is just, that's going to come about. As if it was hardwired into our mind, as if we had no option. Because that person's acted in that way, what else can I do but be angry? But really, it's just because that angry reaction is so much of a fixed habit that we can't imagine it being otherwise. And so we do these exercises with the mind training. They talk about it as being like an exercise. We try to create a different habit just by repeatedly, actually, saying the verses to ourselves, for instance. Then a new thought becomes associated with a certain situation, So in that situation, like where somebody says something irritating, and after a while, if I keep on studying these teachings or reciting the verses to myself, eventually that thought comes in of kind of responding in an opposite way, different way. That thought comes in that situation. I have that thought to not react, but to respond in a positive way. And maybe I don't do it because the habit's too strong, but at least the thought is there. And after a while, I suddenly find that I've responded differently. I have a different experience in the same situation. And slowly, over time, the mind gets more used to it, having that different response. And we realize, I'm not a victim to this pattern of reacting negatively in that situation. I can change that. It takes time, it takes practice, because it's taken time and practice to build up the other habit. There's the same mechanism, but it's very simple. It's like we just, through practice, we cultivate a different habit of reacting positively instead of negatively. And we realize that because the self-cherishing mind, the self-centered mind, has its own logic that it says, this is how I must react in this situation, isn't it? It's like, the person's done that. I've got to, what's the word, the phrase that's used? Got to bounce back, got to hit back. Otherwise, what will happen? So it seems that, it can easily seem as if, and I think to a lot of people it does seem as if these reactions that keep kind of, it's a ping pong, isn't it? React. That's just how it is. That there's no other way it can be. But that's not the case. We can train our minds to respond differently to that given situation. And we can slowly train ourselves to be more focused on what's beneficial to the other person than on what is going to kind of bring a gain to me, if you like. So this is an interesting one because, bearing in mind what you said, Dawn, that, this thought of making the other person's well-being more important than my own, that seems like, that's not quite logical. Doesn't make, everybody should be equal. But there is, and I think this is something we explore quite a lot, because there's a paradoxical teaching, really, that if we do that, it does benefit us very profoundly, even though it seems like we're sort of cheating ourselves,
I think that there can be an inequality and an arrogance if you get to the point where I'm kind of almost superior, so I'll put you first.
Well, of course, it can be. Yes, it can be ego-related. Yeah, and that's a kind of false trail that we can go down, but it can also not be.
Yeah, it's quite a difficult practice to be honest with yourself.
Yes. Oh yeah. The ego is very, very sneaky. It will exploit anything for its own end. Yeah. So when we talk about the ego, that I think it is a useful word, and it's also related to. There's both of the self-cherishing and the self-grasping. There's aspects of both in what we call ego. So that will be something to explore. What's the relationship between this concept of self-cherishing, self-grasping, and what we call ego? Ego is a word with many meanings. But it is, quite useful to look at that, I think. So I'm just going to try to finish off on this first verse and do a few minutes meditation. So being determined to accomplish the highest welfare for all beings. So this is the foundational motivations, bodhicitta motivation. So whoever crosses my path, I will train my mind to focus my intention, my efforts on bringing happiness to that being, whoever it is that crosses my path, on helping them to become free from suffering from now until forever. Right? Not just today, tomorrow, the next day. Why should I ever change that? If it's good today, it's good tomorrow. Why isn't it still good the next day and the next day, till the end of my life, to my next life, to the life after that, forever? It's very simple, isn't it? Just keep training in moving towards that motivation for the sake of others until it becomes completely natural, second nature. And then it's not like we do that until at some point we retire. We've done it. Because there are infinite sentient beings. So we just do it. We just keep doing it. There's no reason to stop, ever. So that was another thing that was very striking with the Dalai Lama. And it always is, actually. When he talks about, I might not be the Dalai Lama next time, because that might not be the most useful thing, but I will be back. I'll be here. Next life, the life after that, and the one after that. No reason to ever give up, is there? Because all the time. I mean, you can see, the with him and with all of these great lamas, that this path, this bodhisattva path that they're following, is just a source of endless joy. There's no reason they're ever going to get tired of it, because it's bringing them such deep, profound joy every day. There's no reason to stop. So eventually, it'll be all sentient beings. Being determined to accomplish the highest welfare for all sentient beings, who excel the wish-fulfilling gem. Because that joy of the Bodhisattva path, that supreme bliss of Buddhahood, it all arises in dependence on those sentient beings. If they weren't there needing to be helped, you couldn't do it. So everything that we have comes from others, doesn't it? You know, the fact that we have a body, the fact that we have food to eat, the fact that we have... So Karmapa actually said, you know, that one of the things that struck him was that when I breathe in, you know, I'm breathing in oxygen. If the oxygen wasn't there, I'd die, I couldn't breathe. Where does it come from? It comes from the trees. So everything that we have comes from others. You know, all the food that we eat, the clothes that we wear, everything. All the happiness that we have. And then this highest, most supreme gift of the spiritual joy of the Bodhisattva and the bliss of Buddhahood comes in dependence on sentient beings because they're suffering. If they weren't suffering sentient beings, all of that couldn't happen. So this is what it means, you know, they excel the wish-fulfilling gem. Everything desirable, everything, every authentic happiness comes in dependence upon others and in dependence upon cherishing others, on, you know, having concern for others, having compassion, love towards others, is the true cause of all my happiness. So others, sentient beings, are more precious than the wish-fulfilling gem. The wish-fulfilling gem is this mythical jewel that, you know, it brings us whatever we want. But this only brings material things. The sentient beings are the true wish-fulfilling gem because they bring the spiritual benefit, which is so much deeper, limitless. Being determined to accomplish the highest welfare for all beings who excel the wish-fulfilling gem, I shall constantly hold them dear. This is the mind training. Yeah? That we train our minds to whoever we encounter to respond to them with love and compassion. That's it. So at the moment, that might not be the case. And you know, that's okay. I mean, that we are where we are at the moment. So if we get irritable and shirty with people, that's how it is, and don't need to beat ourselves up about it. But we can generate this aspiration, this ambition. I want to change that. I would prefer to respond with love, with compassion, whoever crosses my path, whatever they're doing to me, never mind. So that's the aim that we set, to gradually train ourselves that whoever we encounter them with love and compassion. It may take a long time, but that's okay. So that's in a nutshell, isn't it? In 4 lines. Very, very wonderful, very beautiful spiritual poetry in all of these mind training texts. Most of them are in the form of, you know, verses, because it's easy to remember and they're short. So, as I said, you know, Dalai Lama says, well, why not memorize this text and recite it, you know, on a daily basis? So easy to do. And actually it has a very positive effect on your mind. So I recommend it. There are many of them. There are many of these short kind of verse texts of mind training. For example, the Jewel Rosary of an Awakening Warrior, the Jewel Rosary of a Bodhisattva, which is the one in the first half of the book, the commentary by Geshe Dagi. This is one by Atisha. There are several by Atisha, very beautiful. and by some of the other Kadampa Geshis have all written these different verse texts of mind training. And there are some by Tsongkhapa and some of the later Dalai Lamas as well. But this one is kind of the granddaddy of them all. 8 verses of training the mind. Very short, very easy to memorize. So that's a nice thing to do. Okay. Any more thoughts, questions, observations, problems, comments? Yeah? All okay? So shall we do a few minutes of meditation? Take a few moments to tune in to your body. Check your posture. Make sure the back is straight and the body generally is as relaxed as possible. Bring your attention to the breath. And rest your attention on the flow of the breath as it enters and leaves the body. And just let the mind become still. Focus on that point. And let's take a few moments to reflect on what we have received from others. So this body that I consider as mine is a gift from others. I did not make it. It was given to me by my mother and father. My mother carried this body for 9 months. Being very careful what she did or what she ate in case this body should suffer any harm. Endured the pain of labour to give birth to me. Lovingly took care of me. With infinite pains even though I was quite a nuisance. She, my father, my teachers, taught me to speak, to walk, to read, to write, fed me, clothed me. So many others gave me so many boundless gifts. Without which I would have died long ago. Without which I would know nothing. Without which I would have had to undergo all kinds of suffering. Every day the food I eat, being able to travel around, having a health service, all of the things and goods, products, the information that I can use. I'm so blessed with all of these amazing gifts that I take completely for granted, never thinking to meditate on gratitude for all the countless beings who have been involved in their production. All of the acts of kindness that I receive from others every day, so often I don't even think about. The people that keep the streets clean, that provide clean water, so many thousands upon thousands of people and even animals on whom all my well-being depends in every moment. All of these countless beings are experiencing suffering every day. Physical sufferings, aches and pains, aging, sickness, sometimes physical disabilities or injury, mental sufferings, depression, anxiety, stress, all of them are exactly like me. They don't want to experience suffering. They want to have happiness. But mostly they don't know how to achieve it. So therefore, towards what should my energies and efforts in this life be directed? If not, towards relieving the suffering, and bringing happiness to others. And if I want to do that, the first thing that I need is a very strong motivation, a deep, heartfelt desire and wish to be able to free others. And also the understanding of how I can achieve that through training my mind, through the practice of Dharma. So the best thing I can do is to make the resolution right now that I will continue to train my mind in compassion. To train myself to develop this profound spiritual quality, the motivation to become enlightened, to develop my own mind in order to be able to benefit others. If I make this the purpose of my life will not be wasted. Dedication prayers, page 23, at the bottom. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. Through the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. Long Life Prayers, page 34. We do these in Tibetan, traditionally. Tup tsul chang jing jam gun gyalwe Tenzin kyo palwe kunza dog podze Jog som korwe legman tu drup Padak sok du jagan du jab ten chok Gangri rawe korwe jinkam dir Pendang dewa malu jungwe ne. Chenre zi wang tenzin gatso yi. Jape si te bardu tengyo chi. Thank you very much. Thank you. So please leave your email address if you would like the PDF file emailing to you. I'll see you next week. Thank you.
Sorry, apologies in advance, I won't be here next week.
Okay.
My son bought me a Christmas present.
Uh-huh.
It's at Bacon Hall.
I don't know.
Oh,
Is it
really
really
great
different
fun.
menu?
Yeah, it will. And
It's very similar. I feel like you can talk to people.
well, that's the point, because the second half is just that. No, it's all
Christian.
It's all these questions.
Is it
That's how
really?
she does it. So it'll
Oh,
be a
that's-
really entertaining.
I love that venue.
It's very nice, isn't it?
I wish you loved ours,
Oh, long day. Well, look, we'll
But I
catch
saw
up
I see you
before
next then.
3 degrees. Sorry, go on. 90. I'm too. I'm yeah. We'll have a catch up. Yeah, I'll see. Have a catch up then. Yeah. You're right. Tired.
I am, yeah.
Yeah, no, me too. Very. My energy levels just low right.
Well, I feel like I'm tremendous right now.
Oh, well,
I
you're
was
still.
all right, and I'm thinking,
It's hitting
no,
you now,
it's
is it?
hitting me.
Oh, right.
No, like,